This is the cottage path motif, and we're going to learn how to do texture in landscape, how to work with a sky, and getting this nice dimension here with the rolling hills. So why don't you get your supplies ready and we'll get started. I have my woodland set out here and I've mixed up a few colors. You can take your paint set and just decide what you want to do for your trees, your land, your sky, and your fence. First, we're going to work on this outline of the trees. I've got a nice deep hunter green that I've decided upon over here. And what I'm going to do is just start dancing my brush in here, leaving some white of the paper as I go, and grabbing actually the line right here, making sure the paint goes to the line. That's what I mean by grabbing the line from the outside, just to kind of get the shape of that tree. I'll connect some areas in here, but overall that's kind of what we want to do at first pass. It looks a little funny at first, but that's the way we're going to get our texture. We'll do the same thing with some of these other small trees that are kind of like bushes, trees. It's just growing naturally along this path. This motif is part of my Cottage Core series. And so we're imagining we're going on this path to our cottage, and I'm not getting that top one because I'm going to go in with a different colorway in there. Now I'm going to get a little here. We're just laying down that groundwork along the edge of that hill and the horizon line. Get the edge over here. A lot of that will not show because it'll go underneath a mat or a frame. And we've got this tree here. And I think I'd like this to be a little bit more of a hunter green as we go. So we've got this kind of bright green. Just dab in a little bit of grass that might be growing along this path here. I don't want to do too much because I do want to do that lighter color in there first. I've kind of got this line here that swoops, and just kind of dabbling in some paint along there. Now I'm going to add some more of this kind of cavern color in here and see if I can get kind of a nice more olive green. And now I'll go and just pop that. Some of this is still wet, so what it's doing is just mixing right there in the paper, and I'm popping it into the wet areas because I wanted to sort of deepen that. Color was too green for me. I tried it out over there, should have known better, but that's just, I want this to be more muted and less kind of bright springtime and a little more going into fall. But it's really just a discretion that you can use, and depending on what kind of season you want to have your motif be in. So always it's going to look different all year round. And so we're going to let that kind of set up. What that means is letting the water evaporate a little bit. And so in the meantime, let's go and work in the front here of our landscape. I've got the sand ridge here. If you need kind of a tan, you can use either your brown and a tad bit of yellow from any of the palettes that you have, like a Tropicals or whatever you've got at home. And I'm going to actually make this very light. Now see, if this was during the springtime or something, you'd probably do like a light green or something in here. So right now, I don't want to go around this because it will just go everywhere. So I'm going to pop in a few places there and let that just kind of dry. I'm not touching that green so that I don't make a giant mess. And now I'll go along this path here, kind of get some groundwork, literally groundwork here, but our first layers. And you're welcome to just do the path first rather than those trees, if that makes you feel more comfortable so you don't make a mess. Okay, and now go along here. And sometimes it's kind of hard to sort of get this in patchy like this because at first we're not sure we trust the process that it's gonna look okay in the end. And that's, especially if you're a little bit of a perfectionist, it's gonna take a little bit of time to just sort of trust. So you can see I'm just adding in blobs of color. You can see that the minerals are pulling to the edges here as it's drying, which is great because that way we get that texture in there so that when we put our next layers, those will be there. All right, so we've got that first kind of layer going. And I'll go around that. I'll come back over that with green in a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to just, because I do want a little bit of green on this slope, I'm going to see, we're just going to try it out here together. What happens if I just barely touch that green that's sort of still a little bit wet there, and do it here as well. And now it's kind of blending where it's going to look like grass, and we'll go over and define the trees a little bit again, but I like how that just kind of that technique gives that line a little bit of blurriness and a little less dimension. In nature, we've got lots of blurry lines between what we're seeing from afar, grasses that are in front and things like that. So I'm going to let that, because that green was already set up, see it's spread a little bit, but it's not everywhere. If I did it right away, it would go all over the place. You saw this one was a little more wet. It sort of dissipated a little bit more. So you can decide whether you like that or not. You can pull some of your pigment away with your brush like I'm doing here. So it's still blurry, but maybe not quite as far. Otherwise, you can take very carefully the edge of a paper towel and just kind of dab at that. Once you get the water sopped up, it will stop traveling because it's finding the water and traveling along. So now we've got those areas. I'm going to pop in a little bit of green here. And now I'm going to try this kind of bluish green. I think I'll maybe add a little brown to it to darken it up. We'll see. It's not as quite as green as my original color, which is good because I wasn't liking that for the fall. And now I'm just kind of dabbing that in, and I only have these lines in here as a reference, so if you go outside the lines it really doesn't matter because it's a tree line. It could really be anything. So now you could have trees all the way back here. You could add mountains in. That's the kind of nice thing about this prompt, is you could really kind of go a bunch of different ways with it. Okay, now I'll go along here and blend that out. And maybe add a little bit of green coming down here. And using some of that paint to kind of just move it around. Getting those grasses in. You see how it just kind of absorbed into my brush with that extra paint? I'm adding a little bit of brown in there. And put my wet brush across there just to kind of blend that in. And we'll redefine that tree because it's supposed to be there without. Really recommend not getting the green in on that one side. If we want that to pop, I'm going to take some of that back a little bit, and I'll go back over it with the tan in a second. That way, I've painted this once before, but I'm kind of thinking about it on the fly. And you will be too. It'll be your first time, so you can kind of listen to what I'm doing and sort of improvise as you go. There's no real wrong way to do it, so now as long as that's dry in the background, I just had that wet, so we'll see what happens. I'm going into, instead of over here where I have water mixed in, I'm using the brown just straight out of the box with a little tiny bit so that I can get a nice thin line. It's dry and I'm okay with this section. I'm going to follow those posts that way and over here. All I'm doing is thinking about areas to paint that I've waited for them to dry, or they're the right wetness for what I'm trying to do. See, that one kind of got into that wet paint a little bit, and it still looks okay. I like it fine, but and even this area, I don't want to get too close to those posts, but so you're kind of putting that, since this is wet and I'm waiting on it, I'm going to just kind of start to give dimension here at that curve where maybe some grass has grown in, and I'll put some in here. Let's come up along that path. I'm squeezing water into that paint to make sure it's thin and not too dark. I want to be more translucent there. And I'll let that blend a little bit. So I'm looking at this painting, what I'm doing now, what you're looking at, and I'm also kind of glancing at my reference, and I'm getting so into this painting that I'm forgetting to look at what I did last time. So you can also use this video and maybe a still shot if you've got Tamery.com and you can pull it up. You can have it one on your phone and one on your computer or iPad if you've got both. Broadcast it on your TV, so I'm getting some of that kind of texture. You see how I'm dappling that in and just leaving some of the white of the paper or the different levels of greens that I have in there. I'm going to put a little bit of brown on that side. And do want it to look like there's some trees. I'm actually going to go up and above that line on that side. Kind of connect that. I'm improvising here, not just using my lines as a guide, but I'm changing it up a little bit. You can do the same. I want that to go a little bit higher in a few places. Okay. And let me get this in here now that that green is pretty dry. I'm going to go in and get a little bit more of that brown. In through here. So now that I'm putting this second layer on, I'm kind of, if you can see, I'm sort of making a shape that would go with the ground, so it's rolling. So instead of going straight across or just filling it all in, I'm following these lines a little bit and saying, okay, there's a little bit of a dip in the land. That's why it's darker in some places and lighter in others. Don't know if that is actually dry enough yet, but let's try that. Okay, that should give me a little bit of a differentiation there. Okay, you see how that's coming together? Now this tree here, let me go in and just use a clear brush and close in a lot of the white of that paper. I'm still leaving those little crispy edges so it looks like leaves there. And now I'll kind of pop in a little bit of dapple just to kind of, that's still pretty wet, but, and same with this tree. I've got that ground I just put in, so I don't want to go too far to the edge. But the key to texture is just to kind of dapple those in so that the minerals go around that little mark. I'll show you. Like if you just kind of do this, it'll dry around the edge of that little mark and it'll give you a texture without even having to add too many different layers of colors. Okay, let's see. I'm running out of that color, so I'm going to make sure that I got what I need. I'm going to kind of combine those right there. Use those shapes, kind of fill in that path, and we know there's all these grasses from where the cars don't drive and they've kind of haven't been trampled down, so I want to make sure to have those. And we've got this little kind of bush in the background. Might use a little bit of black or not too dark, but in here just to get the trunk of that tree established. Same with this one. And I do want to do like a dark green along this line. I don't want it that bright green. So it's good to kind of work around your painting so that you've got a chance to, if you run out of paint, that you've got that color in several places, and then you add a new color in several places and not have one corner in one colorway or hue and then the whole other painting side of your painting in a different one. So it's good to kind of move around. I think we're good to do these little fence posts here now. It's dry enough ish. Just went back by that a second ago, so let's see if we can get, these are so tiny, so they're just an impression of those posts there. So while we're waiting on that to dry, I'm going to now turn this around and we'll work on our sky. You can use your medium brush if you have one. Otherwise, we just have to work a little bit harder at getting this sky filled in over here. So the way I have the sky in my example, it's kind of like wishy-washy. The photo that I took this from had more clouds that went in a stair step this way, so I was emulating that, but you can do the clouds however you want. So I'm going to cover it with thin amount of water, and of course that's either wet and or thick with green, so it can activate if you touch it, so just try not to. I'm going to go ahead and start as I said, the clouds kind of in that photo that I was looking at sort of go in a succession here. So I'm going to put some light blue in between some of those streaks. I'm leaving this corner sort of open, and this will be more filled in down here and less stripey. So I'm just going to go and sort of tap in very carefully some light blue in that water area around there so that I don't make it green. Now, this is setting up a little bit, even though it's on wet, and I'm going to come in with a clear brush and just kind of loosen some of those lines so it doesn't look as stripy. And now I'll add a little bit of paint to the top of a few of those lines just to kind of make it not look like it was a stroke. That's the way that I did it. Now on this, it's a little more moody, maybe at like kind of dusk time. So I added a little bit of gray, tiny bit of watered down gray. You don't want to overdo it because we don't want to make it too sad, but just a little bit moody. You know how it is in fall time. It starts to get darker earlier and more rain than summertime. I'm going to kind of come over here and just barely put a little bit of water and a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of, not that tiny, I want to be able to see it. I'm kind of making this a little more swirly, hopefully. They're all going to come out different every time. Hopefully that looks a little less like lines. Okay, so I've kind of let that set up a little bit, and what I'm going to do is just kind of come in here and add a little bit, and actually right at this horizon line, sort of adding that look here and a little across there, just to kind of give it more of that sort of stacked look, and blend some of this out at the edge. And I think I'm going to come in and make sure to, you can kind of do this at first if you want, just to make sure you get all of that white at the horizon. I really want it to look like a nice dark blue so that the sky looks like it is actually behind the clouds. Behind the trees. So you see I laid that paint down, and now I'm kind of dispersing it so that it does not look like a line. And you can see how that makes that foreground really pop, because I'm getting rid of that white in there and putting a contrast along that edge. Okay, so I'm going to let that set up and actually maybe pop a little bit of this gray in a few of the new places that I just laid down. I'm just looking for a few little lines that I think might look like stand out, looking a little bit odd, and just kind of blending those in a little bit. And now I am ready to come back and sort of define these grasses here. My original didn't have that outline around it, so you may not want to do it that way, and just put the grasses in after the ground behind it has dried. And I'm going to kind of pop in a little bit more of this ground here, just to kind of, don't like how that didn't bleed naturally there. Kind of fill a few places in. I feel like it needs a little more attention. And kind of getting rid of some of my lines that I drew. See how I just kind of deposited a bunch of paint right there. It's going to give some dimension. Contrast, since I've got those lines in there. Get that tree defined. Low bush. And I'll take my wet brush and just kind of lightly go across a few of these white areas so that they don't look white. I'm liking how this turned out. I'm going to just put a little bit of darker paint here just to kind of define those fence posts and get them solidly in the ground. And I just have it fading out to the edges. You pop it in a frame and you've got a lovely little cottage path.